So, Roman, in part one, we had a little chat around current protocols, traditional strengthening when it comes to the foot, the contribution to sports performance. Then we finished off with assessments and training of the forefoot. So now we're going to move on to the midfoot. What strength assessment options have we got for the midfoot?
I will say it's the difficult part of the foot uh, because it's really complicated really to directly assess this region. But what we know is that in the foot, when you have a ankle plantar flexion, like heel raise, for example, you have also a, a force and a power production around the midfoot. So you have these forefoot that are on the ground, and you have also a power generation on the foot, on the midfoot, sorry, and also on the ankle. And the last couple of study, biomechanical study, show that when you change the toes, so the preposition of the toes could be in neutral, so on the floor, could be in flex position, so performing a heel raise outside a step, for example. That's a great way, that's a great, for example, exercise when you want to just work on the calf and you maybe have some pain issue. It's a great way to continue to work on your calf without have, I would say, a great tension around the foot. And in the reverse, when you have your toes in preposition in dorsiflexion, what they show is that you increase your mid-tarsal or mid-foot force production because it's much more difficult to perform the task, but it could be also an indirect way to assess, I will say, the stiffness of the midfoot to allow this heel rise. And so when I read this article, I say, okay, that could be interesting to work on that. So in training and in assessment, that's why I just modified the single leg heel rise test that we all know from Kim Huber-Lozier, and do the same so with a speed issue. So it's on the metronome, so 60 beats per minute, and you have to perform a maximum of heel rising, but on the inclined plate, which allow the toes dorsiflexion. And about a good normative value, I would say for an athlete, for male athletes, it's around 30 reps until exhaustion, and for female athletes, it's around 26 and 27. So yeah, for sure, the calf capacity is also assessed in this assessment. I know that, but I know also that the issue in this test could also be the midfoot, because it's much more difficult than doing it on the floor, and it's a great, well, I would say an indirect way to assess this region of the foot. And for interestingly, we all know this study by Ratliff around plantar heel pain in 2040 that create this exercise. So it's this exercise when you do heel rise, but with a towel around the toes to have this dorsiflexion. And at this time, the logical, I will say, of this exercise was that you have a high resistance training of the plantar fascia, because you work on this windlass mechanism. So have a dorsiflexion of the toes, increase the tension of the plantar fascia. So doing some heavy strength training in this position will increase the mechanical tension of the plantar fascia. It will be a good exercise for the plantar heel pain patient. And what I believe now, I will say, reading the literature around the role of the plantar fascia and around the role or not of this windlass mechanisms, if we know that when increase the tooth dorsiflexion around the foot, you don't increase the stiffness around the fascia. You decrease the stiffness around the fascia. That it's totally the reverse that what all the biomechanical authors and researchers believe. So you decrease, and in order to keep this tension and this stiffness to raise your heel and keep your raising your arch to have this mindful, it's really an active contribution. So intrinsic foot muscle, but also the extrinsic of that. So I believe that it had clinical and scientific result in plantar repair, not because of maybe a changement around the plantar fascia structure, but maybe because people increase their midfoot strength or their foot muscle strength. But he didn't assess that in the paper. But for me, that's maybe the issue and the result of this article. It's maybe much more related to that maybe some issue around the windlass mechanism, because we know now that the windlass is much more the stiffness around the windlass mechanisms. It's much more related to active contribution of the foot muscle and also of the pretension of the calf. Yeah.
Just briefly, Roman, the windlass mechanism. Just give us a brief.
So yeah, the windlass mechanism is the I will say an anatomical and biochemical mechanism, where when you have your foot on the ground, so for example in sitting or in standing position, and you increase or you put your toes in dorsiflexion, you have a lengthened effect on the plantar fascia that leads to a arch raising. So just doing like that on your toes, and you will see that you have an arch rising. And the idea behind this is that when you have this push-up during the push-up phase, during the propulsion phase, when the heel rise, you have this dorsiflexion. So you have increased the tension of the plantar fascia that's enabled to have a stiff leverage. So it was a passive stiff leverage. So the windlass mechanism historically is a passive, I would say, mechanism. And what luckily research group, but also Lorraine Welty, which did a PhD around just the plantar fascia, show that the windlass mechanism and the two dorsiflexion actually don't increase the stiffness on the plantar fascia, but decrease the stiffness because you change also the resting length of the ligament around the around also the midfoot region. So you don't have an increase of the stiffness on the midfoot during this mechanism, and that the stiffness of the foot when you have the push-up phase is much more related to active muscular contribution in comparison to this only passive mechanism. It will biomechanically, it could make sense, but when you really look at precisely inside the foot, we see that you don't have an increased tension or an increased stiffness on the foot when you have this tooth dorsiflexion. So that's a big aspect for me in assessment and training. And also when you discuss with podiatrists, because some will say not some all podiatrists, but that not aware of the research, learn this at school. I would say very, very well.
In that assessment, Roman, with that heel raise, what position is the foot on the plate? Where does the foot touch the plate?
Just the toes.
Just the toes. Okay.
It's really important because if I'm at the top of the inclined plate, you know that the range of motion will be much more greater, and so it's really just the toes, and so you touch the floor and you go maximally on your heel raise. So important aspect of that, it's performing or find a way to have just a toes dorsiflexion, or if you have an inclined plate, just to put your toes on inclined plate, but not be in the middle of the. That's.
So anything else to add on the strengthening of the midfoot?
About the exercise. So I would say read the literature around the plantar fascia, and I saw this interesting, I will say, setting where they put something on the forefoot, they put something on the rear foot, and you have nothing between. And after they do some heavy loading on the knee, and with biomechanical marker, just seeing how the foot move or the arch deform or not, and so. And when I read this, I said, wow, it could be really interesting to have this, I will say, midfoot tension just by placing two steps on the forefoot and the rear foot. And for the story, so during the lockdown and the pandemic, I'm just putting this video on Twitter around me in the garden, in my parents' garden. I remember just playing with some exercise and just playing to piece of wood, so on my forefoot, and just say, okay, this is my lockdown foot exercise, and I call it a foot bridge exercise. And I remember that I have many great expectation by people, and great reaction by the practitioner on social media. And that's why I call this exercise the foot bridge, because you have the same position, so always single leg stance position than for the foot strength, but the addition of the change is truly that your mid foot is unloading, or you have really nothing just under your mid foot region, that will increase your tension under your midfoot. And this exercise is much more loading isometric muscle action, as I want my patient or athlete to really elevate, to keep their midfoot elevated, and to avoid this collapse during the exercise. And to come back to the forward leaning that we talk about in part 1, and the forward leaning, it's really interesting also in this exercise to increase a little bit you have an interiorization of the center of pressure that's elicit a greater I would say loading impact on the midfoot. And that's it for the exercise. And considering the principle when dealing with program, I reduce a little bit the body overloading, because it's much more difficult also from a setting point of view to have a huge amount of load on your shoulder when it's not in a stable exercise, but you don't do it on the floor. So that's why also. And also in relation to the total volume, it's on maximal forces much more, 80 to 100 seconds for maximal force of total volume of isometric contraction, holding contractions, right? And for hypertrophy, it's between 160 and 240 seconds for hypertrophy on that. So I will say for the forefoot to synthesize much more pushing maximal isometric action, and for the midfoot it's much more on holding isometric muscle action. And it's, we'll say called the foot bridge. And the same, the progression in the program is increase the body weight while decrease the volume and increase the plank distance. Also, that's a great way to I will say have a clear progression that leads to increase the intensity also of the exercise.
So would it make it more suitable to use a Smith machine for that kind of exercise?
I would say, it could be for, people struggling to be very stable, or to have a fear maybe on holding weight on their shoulder. But yeah, you can't with this kind of setting have the forward leaning, So I would say that's the issue of the Smith machine. But for me, it's great for people that have maybe fear of a stable a little bit, or have body weight on their shoulder. And the second one is also for spine or lumbar issue, because the forward lean, it's really a forward lean around the ankle. It's not flexing your trunk. And that's also my external cue on that. It's like, do you know Michael Jackson? Yeah. Do you know when
Yes.
he do this? That's it.
Yeah.
I don't want you to do your trunk flexion, because if you do your trunk flexion, you will feel the load in your erector spinae. Yeah, for sure, and in your glutes. So that I would say you can't have this forward leaning in the Smith machine, but for this kind of people, for sure, it's a great.
So you've mentioned a couple of times the first ray. Just explain that to us and what that is as a structure, and then how would you go about strengthening that? I know you've mentioned it a couple of times already.
Yeah. So if we come back to the forefoot and the first ray, we know that in the forefoot you have the first metatarsal, and after you have the second toe and the two to the fifth metatarsal. We know that this is really two region, because muscle are really dedicated to the first ray, and other muscle are dedicated to the lesser toes. So it's really I would say agonist, but we also know that the muscle, so when I say muscle, which one? So the abductor hallucis for the intrinsic, the flexor hallucis brevis for also the intrinsic, and for the extrinsic is the flexor hallucis longus, which is the larger extrinsic and extrinsic to flexor. He has really an important role in human locomotion. So we know that the muscle so these three muscles, so dedicated to the first ray, has a larger volume and cross-sectional area in comparison to the extrinsic and extrinsic dedicated to the lesser toe. So that's what, when I say that the ratio is between 1.2 and 1.3, it should be like that, like your quadriceps and your hamstring ratio. And about the first way, we also know that a good way biomechanically, you have the first production and the first orientation. So it's all about force platform kinetics. And I am lucky enough to have also the force, or this force orientation and production is distributed. And that's what it's, for me, it's wonderful aspect of that also, because you can say that, you have a lot of force production, but it's not optimized and it's not very well distributed, just on a force plantar pressure aspect. And that's why I told that I many times, I would say not always, but saw the association between have a first strength deficit and have a not very well plantar pressure distribution. And around this plantar pressure distribution, we know that the first that the force should be distributed around this first rep, because you increase the capacity of the force transfer. You have a better force transfer through the foot. And in running, but we don't have data on that on, I would say, sprinting, but in running, we know that the contribution, it's decreasing from first to fives. When you push like that, you should have much more plantar pressure and force around the first, after the second, the three, the four, the fives. And sometimes you don't see this distribution. So that's what this race important. And the second one, for an injury, injury prevention or injury rehab, we know that you have a biomechanical link between the capacity of your first thread to keep your toes on to be on the ground, to stay on the ground, and the inversion of your rear foot. So if your first thread is on the ground and are able to be very stable and touch the ground without elevating, you know that you will decrease the rotation of your rear foot. So from a lateral ankle sprain or chronic ankle instability rehab, it's also very important, to have a stable forefoot, what we call, but a first ray stability during contact time, because we know that if you first ray don't have capacity to stay on the ground, you can have also some biomechanical issue on the rear foot. So that's also important, for that.
I think this is a great area, really interesting area, but I think, and this is me just guessing, and you're going to know more than me, there's probably going to be lots of misconceptions around foot strengthening. What are the most bizarre things that you've heard or seen? And I'd like you to just put some to bed. Put these misconceptions to bed. So what are those misconceptions that people may see floating around regarding foot strengthening?
The first maybe misconception that is, we know that the extrinsic and the intrinsic are teeny muscle. Yeah, we know that in comparison to other lower limb muscle. But it's not because they are teeny that they can be overloaded and that you can't properly train them, and then just the TheraBand and just yoga exercise are enough or are optimal to that. That's the first one. So the second, I would say, maybe misconception is maybe around barefoot training, because it's like I call the one size fits all approach. You say, okay, you have to be barefoot and you will have greater foot strength. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that approach. We know, that minimalist footwear or barefoot is an interesting, or could be an interesting modalities to have an impact on your structure of the foot. So your passive stiffness of your arch and also on the morphology of your foot. So increase, I would say, the volume of the cross-sectional area. So that's what I like to doing, all my exercise barefoot and to have some in the gym, to have some barefoot exposure. But I think that it should not be the only way, only modality. And that's why this article and what I believe it's that you have to strengthen anatomically and walk around this force production around the forefoot and around also the midfoot, because just be barefoot, I will say, increase the loading aspect around the foot, and the morphology aspect is an important one, but you can have volume or cross-sectional and don't able to, have a good first raise strength, for example, because also of as I can say, you have neural activation and so on. And this third one, maybe the misconception also, also about, as I told you, saying that saying combine foot and ankle and say, okay, work on your foot ankle stiffness. So what on your foot ankle stiffness is work on plyometrics, for example. So some pogo jump or I don't know, so explosive maybe heel raise and so on. And as I told you, I really like to see the foot ankle complex as my calf, my triceps, and after as my foot, my forefoot, also my foot. And I want to have this aspect of what is good at analytically, is maybe good at calf, but not really on the forefoot aspect or the reverse of both. And it's really interesting because in the PhD thesis where we now in the cross-sectional study where we investigate the foot strength on athletes and to see how they have an association or not with kinetics during explosive tasks. But we also evaluate the calf strength, and we also evaluate a foot ankle rebound jump where we have the stiffness capacity and the reactive strength of the foot and of the ankle. And it's funny to see not association at all between your isometric calf strength, your isometric MTP foot strength, and your foot, I would say, foot ankle reactive strength or stiffness capacity. It's really, I will say, maybe three qualities, three different qualities. And that's why working on your working just from a plyometric point of view doesn't mean that you will increase your forefoot strength. So I like really this approach always to have some analytic stuff, and some much more global and couple stuff. So like plyometrics.
Cool. My last question for you, and I think this probably ties this whole topic within strength and conditioning program as a whole. How do we integrate it? Where does it go? How do we program for it? I mean, you've dived into the programming of each individual one, but where does it fit kind of more globally within the program?
I would say the first thing around that is, we know, like in the strength and conditioning or athletic development, that we have to focus on something. You have mesocycle, you have periodization. We know that you have 2 months of block of that and 3 months of block on another thing. So where to put the foot? For me, I would choose, we can talk about what I put in the article, but maybe it's much more interesting to talk about the key performance indicator of a foot strength in a strength and conditioning program. And for me, the first thing is that you have to knowing your sport context, because I know that there are some sports that should much more focus on the foot. I really believe in that in sprint, I would say track and field, but yes, sprinting, acceleration, bobsleigh a lot. That's why I was very not happy, but I was very excited to see that like Jonas Dodu or Stuart Macmillan really like what I wrote in this article, because from a clinical and from a field point of view, they probably see that the foot has an impact, without have a scientific knowledge on that. But it's an important aspect. Also, it's why the thesis is interesting. I try to put much more science on what many coaches believe, that believe that the foot is an important thing. So we say that I will rugby also in the rug. Important to be have a strong ankle, solid strength, because you have knee flexion also on that. And I will say also in mediolateral, I will sport action. So with some cutting, with an ability also to have a lot of cutting. So it could be some position in American rugby, or in rugby, could be also in soccer, for sure. Also in basketball and maybe handball. So I would say that you are knowing your sport context, but also your key performance indicator in your sport should say, or should advise you maybe to say, okay, the foot could be an important region. For example, maybe the jump sport action, I will much more focus on not on something else, but not say that the foot is an important region. But for the sport that I've mentioned, I believe that. And after the 2 or 3 important, it's really in your program to consider the body overloading. For me, it's an important indicator. If you can't have that, consider the electrical stimulation. So if you don't have access to have a properly body overloading setting, so I would say outside the gym or whatever, find another way to have a great stimulus on the foot and on the intrinsic. You could be electrical stimulation, because it's also a great modality for that. Find exercise that have also some kind of COP anteriorization, because you will be also you will increase the loading under the foot, but you will be much more also in this aspect of have an isometric contraction of your calf, but not have a totally erased, but also have a great foundation of the midfoot and the forefoot while doing this kind of exercise. And the fourth advice will be to play with Stu's dorsiflexion, because it's an important aspect around the force length, because also the force length curve, as I told you. So yeah, knowing your sport context, body overloading, exercise with COP anteriorization, and play with Stu dorsiflexion. I will say that the foot with this 3 advice, you will find after some exercise. Like you can take mine. I will be very happy. But the first thing, and you can train very intensively the foot between 15 and 20, 25 minutes. So that's also an important thing for me, that with some sport, when I remember the bobsleigh, for example, the bobsleigh, they have a really intensive block just around the foot, but during all the year they have just one exercise per week. I would say some kind of refresh. And so I will say that the foot could be trained between 15 and 25 minutes, very, I would say, with an optimal way, but knowing all I spoke about just before. And what about one, two, three session a week? I would say that between 1 and 2 or so is not the optimal, but I think you will have an effect with that. Or also because this muscle, the intrinsic, the extrinsic, it's really the less trained muscle. So you will have a big improvement in many people. I would say very rapidly. So that's why also I believe in this very intensive, but not not 3 or 4 weeks to have an improvement. I saw very rapid improvements analytically. So if you just look at the strengths, but also about the function, when you look at your plantar pressure distribution during running, so running kinetics, but also on force platform assessment in relation to the reactive strength or foot ankle power, but also if we're dealing with injury with symptom also.
The last hour and a half has been absolutely superb. So thank you very much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And I'll reiterate again, so much respect for people like yourself coming on and speaking in English when English is not your first language. So thank you so much. If anyone wants to dive any deeper into anything that we've spoken about, firstly, they can read the article. But if they want more information on your research or any other people's research that are in this area, where would you direct people?
So I will say I'm on social media. So I have a Twitter account. So it's Tourillon in a French way. Can you say it?
Yeah. No, I'll link to. I'll link to
Tourillon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also on my Instagram, it's my first name and my surname, so very easy to find me.
Yeah.
And you can also put, if you want, my email address, but I think you can find it on Google, my professional email address on my Universe Satori mail address. So yeah, that will be good.
Perfect. Roman, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And I was only going to take up an hour of your time, and I've taken up 2. So there's been so much information there. Let's keep in touch. Have a great Christmas, and speak to you soon.
Thanks, Rob. Great pleasure to speak with you. Yeah.
Thank you.